In this video, we're going to talk about the housing assessment. So we're going to cover the process of adding it, filling it out, finalizing and deleting if necessary, and then we'll also talk about the related housing assessment report. So in order to access the housing assessment, you're going to need to have the case housing assessment permission. So if you don't see this housing assessment record that's highlighted with the key as the icon, then you're going to want to contact whoever manages the user accounts at your agency and request the appropriate level of access that you need. So there's view, which would allow you to just view everything that someone else in your agency has added. And there's also add change, where you can add the assessment and edit it. And then delete, which would allow you to delete not yet finalized housing assessments from your own agency. Okay. So to add a housing assessment, you have to highlight the housing assessment node or an existing housing assessment record, and then click the add button. But before I do that, I just want to describe something that's a little bit different about the housing assessment to keep in mind. So the housing assessment has some cloning automatically built into it. This is because there is a lot of fields in the CTA that were the exact same questions that were included in the housing assessment, and some really similarly worded things. And so we kind of went over all those different overlapping questions and reviewed them with the design team, and we identified that they really are the same. And so anytime that data is entered in the CTA for those overlapping fields, when you add a housing assessment, that same data will be cloned into the housing assessment. So this will just save you some time from double entering this same types of information. We were told that these fields need to exist in both the CTA and housing assessment, but we wanted to minimize the duplicate entry. So that's why we do this cloning from the CTA. So anytime that you can add the CTA prior to adding the housing assessment and you can get that data in, it's just going to be helpful for whoever's doing the housing assessment and save some time and save some double entry. So that's something to keep in mind. So I did add a CTA before I set up this demo so that you guys could see some of that data immediately cloned into the housing assessment. So if I click add, it's going to prompt me for the housing assessment date. This is just the date that the housing assessment occurred. It defaults to today's date, but you can change it to whatever it needs to be. So I'm just going to say it's a couple days ago. And then if I click the add button, it'll add the assessment, cancel, and the red X will close the pop-up and not add anything. So I'm going to click add. So now you can see I've added a housing assessment. The node label is the assessment date and the agency. So I'm logged in as this fake demo agent, so that's why it's showing up as agent 99. And you can see immediately there's some data already entered in here. This is because it's copied from the CTA. You can see some more, and these first 4 nodes have all of the overlapping data that is possible to be copied into the housing assessment. Okay, so let's go back up to participant information, or actually let's do the formal supports information. So this is something that is memorable in the CTA, that's why I'm picking this. The transition navigator information, that's all in the general area, and you can see that I already have that information copied right away. So if I go into the CTA and go to that general node, you'll see that same information. So that's where that's coming from. Same with the identification, whatever overlapping ID types that are here, and then also in the housing assessment, or was that participant information, is checked already. So that's just how it works. Whatever you have filled out in the CTA is going to clone. If for instance, like these participant fields that are about the ID they have, if I wouldn't have answered any of these yet, then nothing's going to clone, but it doesn't change you from being able to edit it here. So you could still just fill it in when you add the housing assessment. It's just, you know, a little bit of double entry once you end up entering it in the CTA as well. So something else to note is that after this information is cloned, it's editable, so you can remove it if you don't want it for some reason, or if you need to update it because maybe there's a typo in the phone number and you've found that out later on. So you can change anything after the fact and you can remove it. That's how these guys work. So it's good in case, there are changes that need to happen. The fields aren't locked down, but it's also going to save some time. Something else to note is that if the CTA was added by a different organization, so there's a nifty record from someone else, then the information will not clone because it needs to clone from the same agency. And then if the nifty record was closed, the information will still clone because there's no reason that that information isn't necessarily still true and good. So another thing to keep in mind. So I said this before, but I'll say it again. All the possible fields that can clone are in these first 4 nodes: participant information, formal supports information, financial information, and housing preferences and needs. The rest of the housing assessment doesn't have any other overlapping fields, so that's all going to be empty and new stuff. So there are 2 other kind of special fields out there that are being displayed from the participant record that are not editable in the housing assessment and can't be changed here. That's this communication supports needs. You'll see I can't type in here. I'm trying to put my cursor in there and it won't let me. That's because it's read-only, and the only place I can update this is in the participant record. And same with the veteran field in financial information. This is also read-only, being displayed from the participant record. So if I scroll up and I go into the participant record, I can find those fields and change them here, and then it'll update in the housing assessment, but you can't change them directly in the housing assessment. Again, this is just to save your duplicate entry since these fields have to be in the participant record. We didn't want to have to put them in the housing and have you have to update stuff there, and they should never be not in sync. That's why we did those ones read only. So now if I go back to participant information, you'll see it was updated, the blah 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 was removed. Okay, so that's how those guys work. I'm not going to go through every single field in the housing assessment. Most things are pretty straightforward, but there are a couple things I'd like to point out in addition to what I've already said. So in the financial information section, there is a calculation field. It's this total guy. You can't edit it. It's read-only based on whatever is entered for the subtotal for person and subtotal for spouse for incomes. These are actually copyable fields, so if they are in the CTA, they'll copy over, and if you need to update them, you will still be able to update them, and then the total will update as well. So that's just a total of those 2 fields. And then there's some other calculation fields in the housing preferences and needs. So I'm going to go there. At the bottom of this section, there are some affordable rent calculations. Okay, here they are. So you have these couple different affordable rents or affordable AFC / HFA / AL rent calculations, basically. So the way these work is you put in the different sources of income, and they both have a little bit different, mostly the same income sources, and then this will total up those resources. Then you subtract the legal financial obligations and health insurance premiums. That's the same down here as well. And then you'll get the subtotal net income. And then for this one, you enter your total monthly expenses, obviously excluding housing, and then it's going to come up with the estimated affordable payment that you can afford. And then same with up here, instead of putting in the expenses, the rent is calculated by 30% of that subtotal of the net income. So those are just calculations that the state created, I'm guessing based on a housing specialist's advice, but they are in no way binding. They wanted to make sure that's clear. They are just developed to help you in case you wanted to kind of come up with a quick calculation of what they could afford, the participant could afford. So that's what those are. And then there are a couple data grids in the housing assessment. So the previous residents and tasks are both multi-record editors. So they work just like all our other multi-record editors. You have to click the edit button and then click the add to actually add a record. And it's going to ask you for the only required information to add this record, which is the address, because this is the previous resident's multi-record editor. So I'll just do 77 fake address road. Put in whatever you know for the address, and then click add. And now I have enough data to actually save a record, and you can keep adding more information if you want to, if you know it. There's the names on the lease or mortgage, the landlord, and lender contact information, then from date and to date. These are not actual date fields because a lot of times with leases, you don't remember the actual date. Maybe you just remember the month. So we wanted you to be able to type something like, September 2019 to September 2020, or to current, or, whatever you want to do. These are flexible. They're not just strictly like 8/23, this kind of date style, but you can put that in there if you want to be specific. Then there is a text field that you can put for a reason for leaving. And then the last one is left on good terms, and this is a yes, no drop down. And that's how that works. So if I save and return to case file, it's going to save whatever changes I've made here and then take me back to the case file. And then now you can see the summary of previous residences, and the summary title is Residential History in the Past 7 Years. So I guess it's important to note that you only have to enter previous residences from the past 7 years. Anything past that does not need to be added. You can if you really want to, but you do not need to. And then the tasks multi-record editor, this works the same way. Click the edit button to add something and then add. And then there's 2 required fields to add a task record. So I'm just going to say, fake housing task. You would put a description of whatever the task is here, and then who you want to assign it to. So the choices are the participant, the housing specialist, and other, which can be anyone. If you select other, I would just type whoever that's going to be in the task description, or you can say assignee Melissa, however you want to do that. That's just an example. And then click add. And then now I have enough data to actually save a record if I wanted to save and return a case file, or just save it in general. But I could also add the date and the completed date if I wanted, and those are actual date fields with the calendar control. So the other nice thing about this completed date field is you don't have to be exact with recording this. Maybe you don't remember when you completed it, but it's more there to help organize which ones are complete versus which ones are not complete. So if I added several other tasks, and I had a whole list of them, if I save and return to case file, you'll see that the completed and the demo site is kind of slow, sorry. The completed and not completed tasks are organized into separate summaries, just so you can kind of keep that straight. So that's what the completed date field is nice for. And if you don't know the exact date, it's not going to be a big deal, but you can just kind of put an estimation. Then the next thing is finalizing. So there is no review missing in the housing assessment. If you noticed any of the nodes we were on, the missing button was always disabled. That's because there are no required fields to finalize the housing assessment. Both the agents and the state indicated that it's too person-centered to really feel like we could require anything, because you just never know what's necessary person to person. So you guys are just going to need to make sure you're reviewing the entire housing assessment and checking out all these nodes and making sure you have everything that you wanted to enter in there, because as soon as you do finalize, the assessment's going to be locked and you won't be able to edit anything anymore, and there's no review missing to prompt you. So you're going to want to make sure you review the assessment before you finalize. And then when you are ready to finalize, all you have to do is click this finalize button, and then the date and whoever finalizes it will be saved at that time. So something else you can do, I'm going to point out before I finalize, is if you have the delete level permission, you can highlight any of the subnodes or the record node and click the delete button to delete the housing assessment. And there's a confirm just in case you really didn't want to delete. I'm going to delete it just to show you, because why not? I can add another one and finalize it because nothing is required. So I'm going to delete it. And now you can see the housing assessment was deleted. So I can add another one back really quick to show you finalizing. Again, I hardly have any information in here, just what's copied, and the system will allow me to finalize it since there's nothing required, but you really should be reviewing it and entering as much as you need that makes sense with the participant. So if I click this and continue, now you can see the assessment is finalized and it's locked. There's the lock icon next to it. If I click on any of the nodes in here, nothing's going to be editable. They're all going to be locked. And if I go to the finalize node, you can see the finalized by and date and time are filled in now. So if you have any issues and you need something to be changed after the fact, you're going to have to contact someone that has never seen record locks. Maybe that's a supervisor, or maybe they'll give you that permission temporarily to make whatever changes are needed. Same with deleting after it's finalized. If you end up needing to delete the housing assessment after it's finalized, you'll need that never see record locks permission to do that as well. Lastly, a couple notes about the housing assessment, or not the report, we'll get to that in a second. The housing assessment, it's not required for every nifty transition, but when it is, you'll go down here to add it, and we do have it separate from the nifty transition node, just because one, it might not always be required. You might not need to do a housing assessment, and then two, the housing assessment might be useful to be used with other programs in the future. So we didn't want to limit it to be just within that nifty transition record. So also the housing assessment, now that you understand the way the clone works, it'd be really good if you're adding it after the CTA is added. Based on the agent feedback we received, that's the typical process, but sometimes transition navigators might be working on the CTA at the same time as the housing specialist is working on the housing portion. And so if that happens, just be aware that if the CTA isn't added before, or if data isn't entered by the time that you click add, you're going to miss out on copying that data. And that's okay. You're going to have to enter it then. And a lot of times I think TNs end up being the housing specialist in agencies where they just can't staff a housing specialist, or it makes more sense to do it that way. So if it is the case, then I would just add your CTA first before you add the housing. Just keep that in mind. Okay, lastly, there is the housing assessment report. If you are on any of these nodes and go hover over reports or click on it, you'll see the housing assessment report. If you click right on it, it'll default to the PDF output. If not, if you want something else, you can go over this far left menu and select what you want from that list. So I'm going to just pick PDF because that's what I can read easiest. And it will automatically generate the report and create it in a different tab. And right now with our demo app, we have a little issue with that null, so just ignore that. It'll show the report name when you guys have the real app. So at the top, there's some basic information, date of birth, participant name, last four of the SOCH, and the agency. And then this other null too will end up saying the housing assessment date, and that's what that is right here. And then it literally basically includes all the information from the housing assessment. And then at the very end, there's the finalized information. And the last page is a participant signature page, which needs to be manually signed and then scanned and attached to your housing assessment. So the state said you don't need to scan in the entire report if you don't want. The last page will do for that. Something to note too is that all of the stuff that's entered into the multi-record data grids, that stuff is included as well on here. Where is it? I thought we added some. Oh no, this is my second one that I created that didn't have any information. That's added and it's sorted in the same way that the summaries are sorted. That's all I was going to say. So that's the housing assessment and the housing assessment report. And that is it.